So today we are continuing our Via Creativa theme of becoming light. We have been exploring how we can give birth to the creative light of love in this world. So this past week, I'm going to start with a Bob joke. This past week, I ordered an egg and a chicken from Amazon, and very soon I will have the answer to the age-old question.
Hey.
So I'll let y'all know which one comes first, right?
Dun, 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 dun.
So a corollary question might be, which comes first, joy or liberation? Are we joyful because we are liberated, or does joy liberate us? And likewise with celebration, do we celebrate because we are joyful, or does the act of celebrating jumpstart our joy? Do we have to sit around waiting for the joy wagon to show up before we can be free, or before the party can begin? Or do we have to be set free and start the dance before joy arrives on the stage? Who knows? But it might be that it works out both ways. Might be that joy, liberation, and celebration are all in cahoots. They're all playing on the same team, dancing to the same groove, and when you get one going, it just naturally leads to the other. Which would mean that from whatever door you enter the day, be it sadness or hope or struggle or optimism or despair, if you can meet and make friends with just a little bit of freedom or celebration or joy, you'll soon be dancing with all three. Find a place where there's joy, and joy will burn out the pain, writes Joseph Campbell. And the flip side might be, find a place where there's freedom, and the freedom will ignite the joy. Either way, it will transform you. And those transforming moments can turn around your head and your day and make you say,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. Coming up on March 20th, mark your calendar, the world will celebrate something known as the International Day of Happiness.
Ooh.
The day was created by a United Nations resolution passed in 2012, which states that the pursuit of happiness is a fundamental human goal. Not only that, the resolution declares that happiness is a universal human right. As such, the resolution promotes the happiness and well-being of people as the only solid basis. I'm going to say that again. The resolution promotes the happiness and well-being of people as the only solid basis for good policymaking by world governments. Imagine. Our founding fathers didn't declare happiness as a human right in this nation, but they did enshrine the idea that everyone should be free to pursue happiness in whatever form they believe it takes, within the limits of the law, of course. But what is this happiness that we're talking about anyway? I mean, what makes me happy may make someone else miserable, and what makes me miserable may be the ticket to somebody else's bliss. So I think the problem might be is that we're confusing happiness and joy. You see, happiness is often fleeting because it depends on conditions outside of ourselves being just right. Joy, on the other hand, is something that we can each have no matter what is happening out here in the world. The pursuit of happiness, though, is all that the ego tells us life is about. And it can get pretty addicting. I mean, we find something or encounter a situation that makes us ecstatic, and when the feeling passes, whew, we are out there looking for the next happiness hit. I know this, and I know this search and experience firsthand. Back in 2007, I decided to write my first book. So I cobbled together the first few chapters. I did some research on how to get published, and I sent query letters out to agents. And after weeks and weeks and weeks of rejection, I finally hooked an agent.
Yay.
Yeah, I know, who guided me through some rewrites, and then he took me on as his client, and I was elated. I was dancing around the house. I got an agent. Oh, my God. And just as that high began to diminish, the agent called and said he'd found a publisher for the book. My happiness again. Woohoo! I'm up off the floor, a few feet. I mean, I could hardly contain myself. More happiness followed. I signed the contract, got a little bit of money in advance, and got to work. And the bloom kind of fell off the rose at that point. I don't know if anybody knows, but writing a book is hard work. Because it's like, okay, I got like 3 chapters, and now they want 50,000 words. I don't even know if I know 50,000 words. There's going to be lots of ands and buts, right? And so, thes and a's, right. So I spent the next few months hyperventilating over this fast approaching deadline with this fancy publishing house that was expecting a book that made some modicum of sense and would make them a little money, more than I would make anyway, but them's how it works. But my happiness waned for a bit during that process, but you know what? Went right back up again when I held the book in my hand about a year or so later. To this day, I can still conjure up all those feelings of happiness, but overall, it was fleeting because the outside circumstances that made it happen aren't happening anymore. So my experience helps me to better appreciate the story of the prodigal son in today's Jesus story. This story that we have read over and over and over again, and all of you your minds just went blank when it started. Oh, the prodigal son. I don't need to listen to this. Let's go back and revisit that story that you didn't listen to this morning. Here's a guy who is completely dedicated to the pursuit of happiness. So much so that he goes to dear old dad and says, "Give me my inheritance now." And he goes off to the big city, gets the heck off of the farm, and he's living it up. He's happy. For a little while, anyway. He's partying. He's hanging out with his new friends. And then the money runs out. Gee, where'd all those friends go? No more big parties. His exterior condition for happiness evaporated with his funds, and he finds himself all alone. He's slopping pigs and dreaming about going home. And we're all like that prodigal son in some way. We want our inheritance of happiness right now so we can go out and blow it, spend it as we please. And we're all pursuing something that makes us happy, whether it's to look fly or get high or just get by, as Michael Franti sings. But happiness, based on anything outside of ourselves, is always going to be temporary. It's the ego's battle cry, after all. Seek, but do not find. We Americans, though, we love that we are free to pursue happiness. It's one of our God-given rights, after all. But how would it change the way you lived in this world, Jubilants, if we stopped pursuing happiness just for ourselves and instead sought to ensure a way that everyone can feel good about being alive? What if that was the basis of good governance all around this world? When we are pursuing the ego's directive to seek but do not find, we, like the prodigal son, we forget who we are. When he's down in that pigsty working for next to nothing, the scripture says he came to himself. How many times have you come to yourself? That capital S self. He realized in that moment that he'd been played by the ego, that he had been caught up in this pursuit of happiness outside of himself, and he no longer knew who he was. He no longer knew, as the Apostle Paul would later call it, a child of light. That realization, it was enough to bring the prodigal son back to his true home, that higher divine self, that seat of true joy that resides within each of us. And I think it's instructive to note that just the realization that he had been duped by the ego was enough to bring him back to his true home of joy. He didn't have to do anything after that. Just realizing it, that he was a child of the light, brought him back to joy. And this is the heart of what A Course in Miracles calls a little willingness, or what Jesus calls having faith as tiny as a mustard seed. The story, though, it tries to warn us that even when we realize that the ego is deceiving us, it will keep on trying. As the son makes his way home, he rehearses all the things he's going to say to Dad. He's going to apologize. "I'm so sorry. Will you take me back, please? I don't have to be your son anymore. I can just work out in the field with the hired hands. I just want to come home." And that's what the ego does to keep us in its clutches. It tells us nobody gets a free lunch. There's going to be a price to pay for your betrayal of your true nature. God is going to punish you for your perceived sins, and it's going to be bad. Maybe you don't really want to go home after all, the ego says. I mean, you're not going to be welcome there. It's going to be bad. Just stay here. Stay right where you are. Pursue that next hit of happiness. It's coming up. I promise. I promise. But the story says that as the son went back home, he was still far off, and his father saw him and was filled with compassion. The father, who represents God in this story, was not angry at all. Instead, he understood deeply his son's pain, because compassion means to suffer with. Our higher divine self knows the pain that our ego can cause, and it, like the father of this story, responds immediately with open arms when we decide we want to come home and be lifted above that manipulative ego. So when the son gets home, he's ready. He's got all of his excuses ready, and his father doesn't even listen to it. Doesn't even hear the apologies. Doesn't even hear the attempt to repent of his sins. Instead, the father is immediately hugging him and calling for a celebration. Oh, but what about that other guy? Because the guy had another son, right?
Right.
If the prodigal son is us, taken over by the ego, who's the other guy? Well, I believe we are both the prodigal son and the son who remained home, because it represents two sides of our ego. The prodigal son is that part of our ego that tells us only happiness can be found out here in the world. Live with abandon. Seize the day. Go big or go home. Gotta go about it. Happiness is out there. It's that risk-taking side of our ego that convinces us we can only find it out here in worldly success. The older brother, however, is the other side of our ego that says happiness is found only when we play it safe, only when we remain small in the world and simply do what's expected of us and no more. The brother who stayed home is our cautious, reticent side, not wanting to venture too far from creature comforts, because that's where we believe happiness is truly found. It's found by playing small. Stay home, stay in your little ego cocoon. The Father, of course, is the higher divine self who welcomes us home, no matter where we've been, whether we've been out on the town or out in the field. What's key here is that the Father invites all aspects of our ego into this holy higher relationship where it can become transformed and liberated and celebrated for who it really is, a child of God. In this story, the wild and crazy ego gets the message. It's tired of being out there living it up. But you know, Jesus in this story, he never tells us if the ego part that craves comfort and security was also willing to join the celebration. So the question becomes for us, can we stretch that part of ourselves that craves routine and comfort to fully experience the joy of living not just for ourselves, but for others in the world? Breathe deeply. While the U.S. may have a constitution that guarantees citizens the right to pursue happiness, it seems that we're just not always that successful. The 2021 World Happiness Report ranks the U.S. as 14th, behind such places as Ireland, Australia, and Israel. The top 3 happiest countries in the world. Anybody got a guess? Denmark.
Sweden.
No. Finland.
Finland.
One more.
Estonia.
Iceland.
Iceland.
Wow.
She's reading over my shoulder. So in the top 3 is Finland, Iceland, and Denmark.
Wow.
It's all those hot tub things to spring.
Yeah.
Right. All those hot tubs, natural hot tubs.
It's the
Right.
sauna.
Right.
Bathing suits all year round.
The hot cocoa.
Right. That's it. We need more hot springs in the U.S. Yeah. So these rankings are telling, since they're based on such factors as life expectancy, social support, perceptions of government corruption, and the freedom to make life choices. While the top 3 countries may not have a right to pursue happiness enshrined in their founding documents, they have leaders who understand happiness is most often found in communal pursuits and not individualistic ones. This is the difference, my friends, between happiness and joy. The pursuit of happiness in the U.S. especially is about my happiness. It's not about our happiness. In fact, studies in the U.S. have shown that people who strongly value and pursue happiness are more likely to feel disappointed, lonely, and depressed. It enhances our feelings of separation when we're pursuing my happiness. In other cultures, however, where collectivist ideals are more valued than rugged individualism, happiness is more likely to be seen as a result of fostering social engagement, being concerned for the well-being of others, and feeling connected to the whole of humanity, where we don't see separation all the time. So I might be able to conjure up all those old feelings of happiness about my book being published, but what brings me joy is that even today, there are human connections being made through the book. I've talked with people whose lives have been affected by my words and how something I put out in the world helped them heal and grow. Even now, almost 15 years later, after its publication, I received a note just this past week from someone who said they had been helped by reading my book. That's connection. That's what brings me lasting joy. So writing the book was a personal achievement, but knowing that it's a source of healing and hope for others is joy. It's not just happiness. Seek not outside yourself. A Course in Miracles reminds us, for all your pain, jubilants, comes simply from a futile search for what you want, insisting where it must be found. If you insist that it's out there, you're never going to be happy. You will always be in pain. What the Father of the prodigal son, that higher divine self we all possess, offers to do for us is to transform our pain of futile searching, to liberate us from it and celebrate our ultimate freedom. My book, it sprung from a really deep source of pain, a seemingly impossible task to reconcile my spirituality and sexuality. But once I turned the pain over to the higher divine self and stopped believing the ego's lies that the two were irreconcilable, then the Holy threw a big old celebration for me and said, welcome home. I learned in that moment that what truly brought me joy was not just the journey out of my own pain, but realizing that this pain is not unique to me, but something that others are seeking healing from as well. We're all connected, jubilants. And when we share the transformation of our own pain, others are transformed in the process, and that is true liberation. When we pursue happiness just for ourselves, it's fleeting. But when we can share that happiness with others, it transforms into a lasting joy, not just for ourselves, but for the world. When we seek corporate instead of personal happiness, we harvest an abundance of joy. And in that moment, when we recognize we're living in this far-off country of the selfish ego, we can go home. But we have to remember that when we encounter others living in their own far-off country of the ego, we're invited to be like the Father to them and be compassionate, to look past their pigsty and see the innocent, true child of God who shares this joyful home of oneness with us. We work, jubilants, as messengers of God to bring that glimmer of joy to the world, to ensure that one day everyone can say, yeah, it's good to be alive today. Amen. Because the world is fed, the world is clothed, the world is sheltered, and it is equitable. This is what it means to be children of the light, jubilants. We must care for one another because we are one another. We share the light, the one light of the Holy within us. And when we shine our light, not just for ourselves, but for others, then we bring everyone to the light. And we all say,
Oh, yeah.